This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Spinster Book by Myrtle Reed, Chapter 6. Love Letters, Old and New. The average love letter is sufficient to make a sensitive spinster weep, unless she herself is in love and the letter be addressed to her. The first stage of the tender passion renders a man careless as to his punctuation. The second seriously affects his spelling, and in the last period of the malady his grammar develops locomotor ataxia. The single blessedness of school teachers is largely to be attributed to this cause. A real love letter is absolutely ridiculous to every one except the writer and the recipient. A composition which repeats the same term of endearment 13 times on a page has certainly no particular claim to literary art. When a man writes a love letter, dated and fully identified by name and address, there is no question that he is in earnest. A large number of people consider nothing so innocently entertaining as love letters, read in a courtroom with due attention to effect by the counsel for the other side. Affairs of that kind are given scarlet headlines in the saffron journals, and if the letters are really well done, it means the sale of an extra. No man can hope to write anything which will possess such general interest as his love letters. If Shakespeare had written voluminously to his sweetheart, to any of his sweethearts, and the letters should be found by this generation, what a hue and cry would be raised over his peaceful ashes! Doing the things which ought not to be done never loses fascination and charm. The rare pleasure thus obtained far exceeds the enjoyment of leaving undone things which ought to be done. Sins of commission are far more productive of happiness than the sins of omission. Thus, people whose sense of honour would not permit them to read an open letter which belonged to someone else will go by the thousands to purchase the published letters of some famous man. Dr. Arbuthnot, in speaking of the publication of letters, said that it added a new terror to death. So true it is, that while a man may think for the present, he unavoidably writes for posterity. No passion is too sacred to be hidden from the eagle eye of the public. The death of any one of more than a passing fame is followed by a volume of letters. It is pathetic to read these posthumous pages, which should have been buried with the hands that wrote them, or consigned to the never-failing mercy of the flames. Burial has not always sufficed. The manuscripts of one well-known book of poems was buried with the lady to whom they were written, but in later years her resting place was disturbed, with the consent of her lover, for this very manuscript. Her golden hair had grown after her death, and was found closely entwined with the written pages, so closely that it had to be cut. The loving embrace which death would not break was rudely forced to yield. Even in her narrow house she might not keep her love letters in peace, since the public wanted to read what had been written for her alone, and the publisher was waiting for copy. In a paper of the Tatler, written by Addison or Steele, or possibly by both, is described a party in a country village which is suddenly broken into confusion by the entrance of the sexton of their parish church, fresh from the digging of a grave. The sexton tells the merrymakers how a chance blow of his pickaxe has opened a decayed coffin, in which are discovered several papers. These are found to be the love letters received by the wife of Sir Thomas Chicheley, one of the admirals of King William. Most of the letters were ruined by damp and mould, but here and there, says the Tatler, a few words, such as "my soul," "dearest," "roses," and "my angel," still remained legible, resisting the corrupting influence of time. One of these letters in a grave, which Lady Chicheley had requested might be buried with her in her coffin, was found entire, though discoloured by the lapse of 20 years. Its words were these: "Madam, if you know the greatness of my love, consider that of your own beauty. That blooming countenance, that snowy bosom, that graceful person, return every moment to my imagination. The brightness of your eyes hindered me from closing mine since I last saw you. You may still add to your beauties by a smile. A frown will make me the most wretched of men, as I am the most passionate of lovers. Death is the advertisement at the end of an autobiography, wherein people discover its virtues. The public which refuse to bear subsistence to the living genius will make his children comfortable by generously purchasing his letters, which were never meant for them. The pathetic story of the inner struggle which would have crucified the sensitive soul, were it known to any save his dearest friends, is proudly blazoned forth in print. Hope and fears and trials are no longer concealed. Illness, poverty, and despair are given rubricated pages. The sorrowful letter to a friend, asking for $5 or $10, is reproduced in facsimile. That it shows the human side of the genius is no excuse for the desecration. What of the sunny soul who always sang courage, while he himself was suffering from hope deferred? What of him who wrote in an attic, often hungry for his daily bread, and took care to give the impression of warmth and comfort? Why should his stern necessity be disclosed to the public, that would not give him bread in return for his songs? It is enough to make the gallant soldier of the world turn uneasily in his grave. In this way, a bit of the greatness so bravely won is often lost, and sometimes illusions are dispelled which all must regret. For years we have read with delight Mrs. Browning's exquisite poem beginning, "I have a name, a little name, uncadenced for the ear." Throughout the poem there is no disclosure, but so sure is her art that there is no sense of loss or wonder. But the pitiless searchlight of the century is turned upon the Browning love letters, and thus we learn that Mrs. Browning's pet name was Ba. Pretty enough, perhaps, when spoken by a lover and a poet, or in shaded nooks to the music of Italian streams, but quite unsuited to the present, even though it were to be read only by lovers equally fond. Though I write books, it will be read upon the page of none. Poor Mrs. Browning, little did she know. There have been some, no doubt, who have written with the future in view, though Abelard, who broke a woman's heart, could not have foreseen that his only claims to distinction would rest upon his letters to loving, faithful Heloise. The life which was to be too great for her to share is remembered now only because of her. Mocking fate has brought the wronged woman an exquisite revenge. That delightful spendthrift and scapegrace, Richard Steele, has left a large number of whimsical letters addressed to the lady he married. She might possibly object to their publication, but not Steele. Indeed, she was a foolish woman to keep this letter. Dear Prue, the afternoon coach will bring you £10. Your letter shows that you are passionately in love with me, but we must take our portion of life without repining, and I consider that good nature, added to the beautiful form God has given you, would make our happiness too great for human life. Your most obliged husband and most humble servant, Rich Steele. Alexander Pope was another who wrote for posterity. In spite of his deformity, he appears to have been touched to the heart by women, but vanity and selfishness tinged all of his letters. Robert Burns was a systematic lover of anything in petticoats, and has left such a mass of amatory correspondence that his biographer was sorely perplexed. There could not have been a pretty maid in the British Isles to whom chance had been kind, who had not somewhere the usual packet of love letters from Bobby Burns. Lawrence Sterne was no less generous with his affection, if the stories are true. At 20 he fell in love with Elizabeth Lumley, and from his letters to her one might easily fancy that love was a devastating and hopeless disease. There was pretty little Kitty, who claimed his devotion, and countless other affairs before Eliza appeared. Eliza was a married woman, and apparently the last love of the heart-scarred Sterne. No earthly thing is so nearly immortal as a love letter, and nothing is so sorrowful as those left by the dead. The beautiful body may be dust, and all but forgotten, while the work of the loving hands lives on. Even those written by the ancient Egyptians are seemingly imperishable. The clay tablet on which one of the Pharaohs wrote a love letter asking the hand of a foreign princess is today in the British Museum. The first time a woman cries after she is married, she reads over all the love letters the other men have written her, for a love letter is something a tender-hearted woman cannot bring herself to destroy. The love letters of the man she did not marry still possess lingering interest. The letter of many a successful man of affairs are still hidden in the treasure box of the woman he loved but did not marry. Both have formed other ties, and children have risen up to call them blessed, or whatever the children may please, for even more dreadful than the new woman is the new child. Between them they are likely to produce a new man. The new child is apt to find the letters and read them aloud to the wrong people, being most successfully unexpected and inopportune. A box of old letters, distributed sparingly at the doors of mutual friends, is the distinguishing feature of a lovely game called playing postman. Social upheavals have occurred from so small a cause as this. It sometimes happens, too, that when a girl has promised to marry a man, and the wedding day is set, she receives from a mutual friend a package of faded letters and a note which runs something like this: "My dear, now that my old friend's wedding day is approaching, I feel that I have no longer the right to keep his letters. They are too beautiful and tender to be burned, and I have not the heart to make that disposition of them. Were I to return them to him, he would doubtless toss them into the fire, and I cannot bear to have them lost. So after thinking about it for some time, I have concluded to send them to you, who are the rightful keeper of his happiness, as well as his letters. I trust that you may find a place for these among those which he has addressed to you. Wishing you all the happiness in the future, believe me to be very sincerely and affectionately yours." The dainty and appropriate wedding gift is not often shown to the happy man, but every page and every line is carefully read. Now and then the bride-elect advances boldly to the firing line and writes a letter of thanks after this fashion: "It is very sweet and thoughtful of you, my dear friend, to send me the letters. Of course I shall keep them in with mine, though I have but few, for the dear boy has never been able to leave me for more than a day since we first met. Long before we became engaged, he made a present of your letters to him, which he said were well worth the reading, and indeed I have found them so. I shall arrange them according to date and sequence, though I observe that you have written much more often than he. I suppose because we foolish women can never say all we want to in one letter, and are compelled to add postscripts sometimes days apart. Believe me, I fully appreciate your wishes for our happiness. I trust that you may come to us often and see how your hopes are fulfilled. With many thanks for your loving thought of me, as ever, affectionately yours." If a girl is in love, she carries the last letter inside her shirt-waist in the daytime and puts it under her pillow at night, thereby expecting dreams of the beloved. But the dispenser of nocturnal visions delights in joking, and though impalpable arms may seem to surround the sleeping spinster, and a tender kiss may be imprinted upon her lips, it is not once in 17 days that the caresses are bestowed by the writer of the letter. It is a politician whose distorted picture has appeared in the evening paper, some man the girl despises, the postman, or worse yet, the tramp who has begged bread at the door. When a man is in love, he carries the girl's last letter in his pocket until he has answered it, and has another to take its place. He stoops to no superstition as placing it under his pillow, neither is it read as often as his letters to her. A woman never really writes to the man she loves. She simply records her fleeting moods, her caprice, her tenderness, and her dreams. Because of this, she is often misunderstood. If the letter of today is different from that of yesterday, her lover, in his heart at least, accuses her of fickleness. A man's letters to a girl are very frequently shown to her most intimate friend, if they are sufficiently ardent, but a man never shows the letters of a woman he truly cares for, unless he feels the need of some other masculine intellect to assist him in comprehending the lady of his heart. Nothing feeds the flame like a letter. It has intent, personality, secrecy. But that is love indeed which stands the test of long separation and letters. With a single drop of ink for a mirror, the old Egyptian sorcerer promised to reveal the past and foretell the future. The single drop of ink with which a lover writes may sadly change the blissful future of which he dreams. The written word is so sadly different from that which is spoken. The malicious demon concealed in the ink bottle delights in wrecking love. Misunderstandings and long silences follow in rapid succession. Tenderness changes to coldness, and love to bitter regret. Someone has said that the true test of congeniality is not a matter of tastes, but of humor. If two people find the same things amusing, their comradeship is a foregone conclusion. But even so, it requires unusual insight to distinguish the playful parts of a letter from the serious passages. If the separated lovers would escape the pit of destruction, let all jokes be plainly marked with a cross or a star. A letter is an unfair thing. It follows its own mood blindly without reference to others. If penned in sadness, it often makes a sunny day a cloudy one, and if written in jest, it may be as inappropriate as mirth at a funeral. A letter betraying anger and hurt pride may often crystallize a yielding mood into determination and summon evil spirits which love cannot banish. The letter asking forgiveness may cross the path of the one which puts an end to everything. It would seriously test the power of the Egyptian to foretell what might result from a single letter written in love and tenderness, perhaps, but destined to be completely misunderstood. Old love letters often mean tears, because they have been so wrongly read. Later years, with fine irony, sometimes bring new understanding of the loving heart behind the faulty lines. After all, it is the inexpressible atmosphere of a letter which is felt, rather than the meaning which the phrases ostensibly convey. Tender secrets are concealed in the weather-worn bag of the postman. The lovers may hide their hearts from all but him. Parents, guardians, and even mature maiden aunts may be successfully diverted, but not the postman. He knows that the girl who eagerly watches for him in the morning has no more than a passing interest in the mail. He knows where her lover is, how often he writes, when she should have a letter, and whether all is well. Sometimes, too, he knows that it is better to take a single letter to the house 3 or 4 times in succession, rather than to leave it in the hands of one to whom it is not addressed. Blessed be the countless cupids in the uniforms of the postal service. The little blind god is wont to assume strange forms, apparently at will, but no stern parent could suspect that his sightless eyes were concealed behind the spectacles of a sedate postman, nor that his wicked arrows were hidden under the piles of letters. The uninitiated wonder what there is to write about. A man may have seen a girl the evening before, and yet a bulky letter comes in the afternoon. And what mysterious interest can make one write 3 or 4 times a week? Where is the girl whose love letter was left in pawn because she could not find her purse? The grizzled veteran never collects the 2 cents due on the love letters that are a little overweight. He would not put a value upon anything so precious, and he is seldom a cynic. Perhaps because, more than anyone else, he is the dispenser of daily joy. The reading of old love letters is in some way associated with haircloth trunks, mysterious attics, and rainy days. The writers may be unknown, and the hands that laid them away long since returned to dust, but the interest still remains. Dead roses crumble to ashes in the gentle fingers that open the long folded pages. The violets of a forgotten spring impart a delicate fragrance to the yellowed spot on which they lay. The ink is faded and the letter much worn, as though it had laid next to some youthful breast, to be read in silence and solitude until the tender words were graven upon the heart in the exquisite script of memory. The phrasing has a peculiar quaintness, old-fashioned perhaps, but with a grace and dignity all its own. Through the formal, stately sentences the hidden sweetness creeps like the crimson vine among the autumn leaves. Brave hearts they had, those lovers of the past, who were making a new country in the wilderness, and yet there was an unsuspected softness, the other soul side, which even a hero may have, to show a woman when he loves her. There are other treasures to be found with the letters. Old daguerreotypes, in ornate cases, showing the girlish, sweet face of her who is a grandmother now, or perhaps a soldier in the trappings of war, the first of a valiant line. There are songs which are never sung, save as a quavering lullaby to some mite who will never remember the tune, and fragments of nocturnes or simple melodies which awaken the past, as surely as the lost shell brings to the traveller inland the surge and thunder of the distant sea. All the mysteries of life and death are woven in with the letters, those pathetic remembrances which the years may fade but never destroy. There are old school books, dog-eared and musty, scraps of rich brocade and rustling taffeta, the yellow sampler which was the daily trial of some little maid, and the first white robe of someone who has grown children of his own. Give memory an old love letter and listen to her singing. There is quiet at first, as though she were waiting for some step to die away, or some childish laughter to cease. Then there is a hushed arpeggio struck from the strings which are old and worn, but sweet and tender still. Sometimes the song is of an old farmhouse on the western plains, where life meant struggle and bitter privation, brothers and sisters in the torn, faded clothes which were all they had, father's tremulous "God bless you" when someone went away, mother's never-ending toil, and the day when her roughened hands were crossed upon her breast, at rest for the first time, while the children cried in wonder and fear. Then the plaintive minor swells for a moment into the full major chord, when love, the king in royal purple, took possession of the desolate land. Corn huskings and the sound of monkey musk, scarlet ears and stolen kisses under the harvest moon, youth and laughter and eternal wavering hope for better things. Long years of toil with interludes of peace and divine content, little voices and sometimes a little grave, separation and estrangement, trust and misgiving, heartache and defeat. The tears may start at memory singing, but as the song goes on, there comes peace, for there is magic in the strings which changes sadness into something sweet. Memory's eyes are deep and tender, and her heart is full of compassion. So the old love letters bring happiness after all, like the smile which sometimes rests upon the faces of the dead. End of chapter 6.